morning, everybody. This is going to be like, I'm going to upload these videos, at least this one that you see, should go right up like a little update. Sometimes I post older videos, those that kind of see, and then today it will be like a little update. I didn't want to actually do any like rollout or update because I got kind of sick the last few days. And I thought, oh, today would be a good day to do nothing. But I have to review some upcoming videos, teaching posts, and I thought, I'm tired. And then I felt, no, I maybe should do a little rollout. Local issues and national issues. That video where I tried to just talk a little bit about the Trump investigation, the special prosecutor, really it was hard to listen to. But I made it really before the ball started rolling the last 2 days, where on that video I did say I think Mueller should step down from this, Robert Mueller should step down, and that they themselves, their investigation, there should be a special prosecutor investigating Mueller and his team. And in short, what I've seen was there was a man by the name of Strokes, kind of a strange spelling name, Stroyk or whatever. He was one of the top investigators. And then the other man, I think Wiseman. But what you saw, the Judicial Watch, which is sort of like a conservative watchdog group, through Freedom of Information requests, they got a lot of emails and stuff that they're also just in general, not particularly from Mueller. But it showed that the team investigating Trump, they themselves should be under investigation. The man by the name of Strokes, who was a particular key influence in Mr. Comey, former FBI director, he was the one that convinced James Comey on the investigation into Hillary Clinton to change the wording from gross negligence, in which he did with the server and the emails and all that, into something less, extremely careless. Now, I remember just watching the news, listening to legal analysts at that time. They said it's strange that Mr. Comey would use language. Some now are debating it made no difference. No, it did make a difference. Gross negligence, if they simply, when James Comey, former FBI director, if he said gross negligence, which really the same thing, but he changed the wording. And the only reason that wording was changed was to simply make it look less like a crime, what Miss Clinton did. And when they interviewed Mrs. Clinton, it was these people that are in this present investigation that jumped through all types of hoops for Mrs. Clinton to not be under possible perjury charges. When they interviewed Mrs. Clinton, they did not put her under oath, but they did that to General Flynn. And you could see, in short, that the people on the team of Robert Mueller, who are going after Trump right now, they are highly political, and they themselves might have crossed barriers of legality. It's possible that James Comey, former FBI director, could be charged with obstruction of justice. So what we would need is a special prosecutor, multiple ones, to look into Mueller and his team, to look into why these men on the inside. Mr. Strokes also sent an email. There's a lady, Sally Yates, I think was her name. When Trump made the decisions on the so-called ban on Muslims, which is kind of a real popular thing. The ban that Mr. Trump made was a kind of change. It was fought in the courts. The Supreme Court just ruled 9-0 to let it, I believe 9-0, to let it go through. Because the wording about that action by a president, about people that are immigrants coming in from other countries, it's really cut and dry. Meaning when Trump said, you know, from these particular 7 countries, we're going to use, a temporary ban on people coming in from these various countries, and it's been fought in the courts. Look, people that are legal analysts, when you watch what some of the judges ruled on this, the Trump thing, they actually ruled that it's legal to do it, but because Trump, and they went to all of his statements in the campaign and said because Trump spoke negatively, all of that had nothing to do with the law, to be honest with you. And I am pro-immigrant. I'm going to get to something in a second, which will be a Democratic thing, okay? So when Trump did that, this lady, I think she was the acting director, her name was Sally Yates at the time, and when a president makes a ruling, if it's challenged in the courts, which happens, the Justice Department will normally defend the president. It's sort of like, on a ruling like that, you defend it if you have legal backing, if it's challenged. Well, Sally Yates publicly came out and said, I'm not going to defend it. And it had nothing to do, she basically didn't do her job. She was supposed to at least defend it because it was defensible, and I just told you the Supreme Court last week ruled 9-0 that let it go through, and it's not settled completely. Okay. But when she did that publicly, she was saying, I'm against the policies politically of Mr. Trump, and in my official position, acting director, whatever, I'm not going to keep the law. That's what that woman said. Now, one of the key investigators on Trump right now in the Mueller team, who has now been demoted, he's not on the investigation anymore, but he sent an email by the man Strokes. He sent an email to Sally Yates and said he praised her. He said, great. Thank you for the stand that you took. Though the stand she took was wrong in the sense of it wasn't the performance of her job. This man, Mr. Strokes, also, I believe, is having an affair with somebody in the office of the FBI, his mistress or whatever. And just a note, we are living in a highly politicized environment, highly charged with harassment, sexual allegations, and by the law of God, Mr. Strokes has committed a severe sexual sin. It's called adultery. And you might laugh and say, oh, but that's a common thing. Right now I'm just saying that that man was living in rebellion and sin against God, and colluding in the sense of having these inner conversations. And it shows you that this investigation and these people, the other man I think's name was Weissman, the same type of questions now about this man. And he had other cases, Mr. Weissman, who is still on the Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller team. Mr. Weissman had cases where he got convictions, and later the Supreme Court overruled the convictions of Mr. Weissman, if I got the name right, 9-0, showing that what he was doing had nothing to do with the just law. He was just going after people. So I really do seriously believe the last few days, enough came out that what you're seeing is more or less a political, whether Mr. Mueller's a Republican, which he is, what you're seeing is a political sort of witch hunt. Because it seems as if the whole Russian collusion did not take place, and Mr. Mueller and his team are going after what you refer to as an obstruction of justice charge, to try to get charges against Trump, meaning he possibly fired the FBI director Comey in order to stop the investigation on him. But some analysts have actually said, can a president ever be, that's my daughter and the dog, can a president ever be charged with obstruction of justice? I think Alan Dershowitz believes actually not if you're just performing your job, meaning if a president has the right to fire an FBI director, there's some question there. All right? So I do indeed think there's a lot of political stuff going on. And when you're talking about, quote, the taking down of a U.S. president, and you have people on the inside, as questionable as this man, Mr. Strokes, and Mr. Weissman, who did special favors in the investigation of Hillary Clinton. There's no doubt about it. Because a fair reading, all those crazy tweets people say about Trump, a fair reading was they went out of their way to cover up criminal activity, both by Mrs. Clinton when they changed the wording of gross negligence to extremely careless, the meeting with Loretta Lynch, with the husband of a woman under investigation. Loretta Lynch met with Bill Clinton. Look, all of these things are indeed, if we want an honest look at everything, when you see me upset at things, it's because what I see, if I'm seeing any tip of the scales in dealing with legal issues, that upsets me. If you did an honest view of all of this, supposedly the media reported that Mr. Mueller, they obtained the bank records from the Deutsche Bank, meaning they're now looking at all the money that Mr. Trump owed or debt in the past. But then Jay Sekulow, one of Trump's lawyers, said that's not true. Now, I'm not sure if the media lied like Brian Russ lied last week. So 3 weeks, a media guy who lied about something. So there's a lot going on. Now for the local issues, because it's already 11 minutes. Blake Farenthold is one of the congressmen now caught up in the entire sexual harassment story going on in the country. Men like Matt Lauer, big newsmen like Charlie Ross, of course, the actor Kevin Spacey, started with Harvey Weinstein, the producer. All of this is coming out of the woodwork. But sure enough, Blake Farenthold is from Corpus Christi. He's our congressman. He's a Republican. I heard him yesterday. So the local media, of course, rightfully is covering that Mr. Farenthold, over the last, I think, 5 years, Congress had a slush fund, which now they're going to change. But whenever a congressman was accused of sexual impropriety or harassment, if they settled, it was taxpayer money, which we now know that was wrong. We're going to correct that. But one of the settlements was with Blake Farenthold's accuser. And they paid her, I think, $84,000 to settle. Now, the Kohler Times, which really is more of a liberal or democratic swing on things when you read the editorials and so forth, but they did have an opinion piece on the accusations that the woman made. So some are questioning whether or not they should have put some of that language in the paper. Either way, Farenthold has now said, he said, I did no wrongdoing, but we settled the case. Even Democrats and Republicans that investigated it at the time, like they're doing with others, they said they ruled that he really didn't do anything wrong, but they still paid. But because Al Franken, Democratic senator, might step down today, because John Conyers did indeed resign, it seems as if yesterday the young Democrats in the political scene here, they were at, I believe, the office of Blake Farenthold here in Corpus Christi, and they're calling for him to step down. And I would just say, I would give my voice in agreement with them, that if we're asking for the others to step down, then yes, these local Democrats, they have the right to ask for Blake Farenthold to step down. He has said, I'm going to repay the money. Maybe he already wrote a check back. But others are also stepping down where settlements were not made, okay, or other settlements outside. So I would say, yes, you have a right to protest and ask for Farenthold to step down. And let me talk about another local thing. Two local things. We had another death. I heard Sheriff Jim Kalin on Jim Lago's show, local radio show, the other day. We had a death again in the sheriff's jail, the county jail. And it was someone that was being held. He was already convicted, but they were just holding him until they sent him to whatever prison he was going to do his time. So they found him dead. It's being investigated. I don't know but we've had a kind of a problem with that here. And that's questionable. And I'll just mention it. I didn't see anything else on it. Mark Gonzalez, the new DA, he got into a little hot water because it was reported that he was not licensed to practice law over the last month or 3 weeks or whatever. All right. We had another case like that in one of the other counties about a year ago. I think it was Aransas County. But it was a big case because it was a murder case that even the World News covered, or 60 Minutes, one of them covered. It was the Strickland case, I believe. Sad case of the girls. One was murdered, I think Molly Olguin, and the other was severely, I forget which one was murdered, but there were two girls, and they were shot in the head and right around here in the Aransas area. I commented on it at the time, but then they had a challenge. One of the challenges that Strickland's defense brought up was the DA in that county also was not licensed to practice law. What happened in these cases was the DAs, as lawyers and prosecutors, top prosecutors, they have to pay their lawyer fees to the state bar. And if you do not pay those fees, it's like your certification runs out. We had certifications at the fire department. Of course, the fire department paid for our certifications every year, for every 4 years, every year, various certifications. So lawyers had the same thing. Now, if I was a fire inspector certification. I didn't deserve having it, but I had it because I had to go to a school early on at the fire department. Rookies have to go to all the new schools, and we had a school that was for fire inspectors. And they said the rookies are going, and that's fine because they paid me an extra like $25 a month for 25 years because I happened to make it in. We just had a few people at that time that actually had that certification of fire inspector. But if the city never paid my fees to the state, as well as our EMT certifications and even our firefighter certifications, then by law, we were not allowed to practice that particular skill. All right. Mark Gonzalez, for whatever reasons, he explained it. I'm not really criticizing the explanation, but the fees were not paid to the state bar, and they sent various notices to Mr. Gonzalez, the DA of Oasis County. And then they said they did emails and actual snail mail, regular mail. And then they said, we're going to suspend your license to practice law in Texas. So it was suspended for like 3 weeks or so. Now, when it happened in the other case, what I mentioned, the immediate response, we had a few problems like this with the county judge by the name of Burkett. Seems like a nice lady, but she was not a citizen. She had to get a citizenship. Okay. Mr. Gonzalez said, they looked at it. He gave a little, I didn't watch it, he gave a little apology. It said live on Facebook. The local media reported it. He said, as far as we know, one of his other top prosecutors is a man by the name of Mark Manning. And they said, we look back, as far as we know, thankfully Mr. Gonzalez was not involved in any of the criminal cases over the 3 weeks or so that he was not licensed to practice law. But then they also said in the article, I just saw it yesterday, I don't even know if I read it. It said because the prosecutors under Mr. Gonzalez are deputized by him, the case that the DA and the local officials make was, even though Mr. Gonzalez was not licensed himself, but he was the default DA or whatever, therefore, I think this is highly legally questionable. And I think that good lawyers, and we have a severe case right now, the Lance Taylor murder case, which I spoke about. They finally found the witness that was missing. I think his name was Miller. He was in jail in another county. And this is a very severe case. And I find it hard to believe that Mark Gonzalez had said, his explanation was over the last 3 weeks or so when he was not licensed, he just did like office work. He had nothing to do with any legal work. That's almost impossible for me to believe. And so what we're asking, you say, who are you, John? We, the public, the citizens, are asking that you would get a legal opinion from Ken Paxton, who is the state's attorney general of Texas. Get a legal opinion from him. And then let that legal opinion be shown to the public. Because in a couple of these questionable things, when it's found out that we had certain lawyers or judges or whatever, in a few of them, when it was found out that their certifications, if you will, expired, The local officials are just saying, oh, it doesn't affect anything. I think it affects everything. I think the Burkett thing, when it was found out, I was not against Miss Burkett. She's still on the court. I think anybody that had any rulings that these judges or DAs or prosecutors or whatever, if they were involved in any of this, while they were actually not licensed to practice law, I think they should all be thrown out. So, Mr. Gonzalez, we're just asking, I didn't watch your Facebook thing, you seem like a nice man. But we're asking, you did say on your Facebook apology, something like, I might have read it, I didn't watch it, but it said, I'm trying to do my best and I will be making mistakes. And look, we understand that in life, but what we want is, because you deal with law, you see, you deal with law. Your jobs are basically, we're out, and if you step over boundaries, the Mueller investigation, and if you people within that system have done that yourselves, whether you yourselves as investigators of the Mueller thing, if you've stepped over boundaries of law, both the law of God and man, then you need to be investigated. This whole Mueller thing, it's starting to look like they need to have a special prosecutor just look at this investigation. And this Mr. Strokes and the Jim Comey, and how he was persuaded by somebody on the inside for political bias to change language, and yet he's doing it on the opposite to take down the U.S. president. Because an honest look at this would have been, more than likely there's no Russian collusion. But now you have people like Weissman and Strokes. Strokes is now not in the investigation, but he should be investigated. Because you have these people, one who's committing adultery regularly, which is a sin, and it's an extreme violation of law. It's worse than lying to the FBI, which you deem such a terrible crime that you took a man by the name of General Flynn and destroyed him over that. That's what he pled guilty to. So you need to be investigated. Farenthold, I'm going to say I agree with the Democrats that you should step down. And the other thing, why are they making all these Democrats step down? Why are some of the other Democrats now calling for Franken and so forth? If everything does not go through with this whole Russian collusion thing to get rid of Trump, and then they're going to bring up all of this stuff with the Trump thing. And yes, the Billy Bush video of Trump saying, yeah, I grabbed these women and all. Here's the problem with the Democrats. Out of the political parties in this country, you were the one that had a president by the name of Bill Clinton, who I did not dislike. And he had multiple allegations made against him throughout his life as governor, attorney general of Arkansas, and all that. And some were credible, some were of rape. Juanita Broaddrick insists to this day, and there's some evidence it's true, that he actually raped her. Now, when these things came out over the years, when even Mr. Clinton was president, you did such a defense in the sense that even though it was wrong, it should not have affected his job or any of that. So you're the ones that laid that standard down. And I think they're throwing a lot of them overboard right now, the Democrats, because that's going to be their next thing, if the Mueller thing does not work. And we're asking for the Mueller team to be investigated. So those are the three. The wildfires in California, the last 2 days, very bad. They evacuated like a couple 100,000 people. And the winds are blowing. A few years ago, when these wildfires were starting, there were there were reports, I think some in Philadelphia, where they were finding train trestles set on fire. People we have a question whether or not in this country, whether some have understood that, look, if they're trying to set these arsenals, there's a question whether or not this is playing a part in what's going on in some of these wildfires, because we've not heard resolution on a lot of those things. Okay, I think I hit them all. I'm going to, this might be the only one as the update for today. If I don't do any more, I usually tag this little update to the next teaching post. Ephesians 2 is what I was going to focus on. It's coming up, and it's an excellent chapter, our union with Christ. And it's going to show also sometimes commentators, maybe don't see. It talks about God uniting both Jew and Gentile. This is Paul's epistle to the Ephesians, who hath made both one and broken down the middle wall of partition between us. He's talking about the law being taken away in Christ, fulfilled in Christ. The law of commandments, meaning we are now in this covenant of grace, and one of the effects of it is that both Jew and Gentile are no longer at enmity with one another. That's one of the things. Sometimes it's interpreted, that passage in Ephesians 2, as we are reconciled to God, which is true. But it's saying the law and commandments was also a separation. If this gets into ethnicity, and it would deal with some of the politics that I didn't hit on right now. The recognition of Jerusalem now as the capital of Israel. And I would just say in the New Testament, it's no longer about a land issue. And I hear the arguments, and I'm a defender of both Jewish people and Palestinian Christians. And I try to not see it from the lens of all of this land. Really, God gives things to us as promises and covenants we've been talked about. But it's all God's. It's all God's, okay? Everything we have is God's. And when God commissioned people to have land in the Old Testament, and he also said, if I give you these areas, particular territories and so forth, the whole debate about, says, and then there's ways you are required to treat strangers or aliens or immigrants. These are requirements for you to reside in the land. And if you take the land, and you dwell in the land, regardless of where it is, and then you violate my covenant, it's no longer going to be yours. That's the history we're covering in the Old Testament. So I would just say for people that we want our own capital and our own land, and this is whole history, you say, here have we no continuing city, but we look for one to come. This land, our bodies, are temporary. And so we're here to speak truth. So this would be the first, it might be the last one for today. And I'll try to add a few links, possibly, maybe not. And I'll try and add a catchy title because I would like everybody to watch this. God bless everybody.